Good morning. This is Kenneth and Heather with the Advancing Equity Coalition, here to give you our quick recap on last night's MPS school board meeting, the last one of the school year, fiscal year, however you want to measure it. It was the last one of the year and our last one until August 16th. Heather, how are you doing today?
I'm good. It was a roasty school board meeting last night.
Yeah. Unfortunately, neither of us could make it in person because we are both recovering from COVID. But we watched online, and our colleague Bailey was able to be there in person to help us catch what we couldn't see on camera. So we're happy to give you our recap. Just know that we might have a little bit of perspective missing, but we feel like we got it pretty much covered. So, with that, Heather, do you want to go ahead and give us the rundown of last night's meeting?
Yeah, so last night the school board meeting started with some recognitions. There was a lot of amazing student talent to be acknowledged, starting with the adaptive bowling team that won state. There were two robotics winners who won for both leadership and ingenuity. There were a lot of track athletes that were, and as a track mom, I was here for that. That was very exciting to see track athletes be acknowledged. Then the Indigenous community and several of the representatives acknowledged the work of Superintendent Graff, specifically on different MOAs regarding students and pathways. That was really beautiful. They honored him with a quilt. Um, Graduation was acknowledged a little bit. And then we got
Congrats to all
into
the grads this year, by the way, the
congrats
2020
to all the
congrats.
grads. Yes. And then there was a lot of public comment that had a theme around the budget that was being passed last night. And then we took a little bit of a recess. And then we came back and we learned that we are adopting a K-5 math curriculum that was proposed. And then there was a whole presentation on what the steering committee did and how they came to that process. Then let's see. Then the board had a long discussion about the budget. There was a proposed amendment to change it at the last minute that was voted down. Ultimately, this board voted to pass a budget that was proposed by the finance department. It was a vote of 6-3 with Nelson Inns, Adriana Cerrillo, and Ira Jordan voting against this budget, and the other six board members voting for the budget. It was also important to note that it was Superintendent Graff's last school board meeting officially, and Student Representative Rance. It was her last meeting because she's going to be moving away. So even though it was not a lot of policy passed, it was a jam-packed meeting that did not end until after 9 o'clock last night.
Yep. And that this is generally how those budget approval meetings go. Just as a little bit of background information, the district has to approve a budget by June 30th and submit that to the Department of Education, the Minnesota Department of Education. And so last night was the last opportunity in order to do that.
Mm-hmm.
With that, I want to actually highlight a slide of the night that's not from last night's meeting. The only slides we saw from last night's meeting was about around the K-5 math curriculum adoption. But this slide is actually a slide from the finance committee meeting in May. And this slide is really to help people understand what our budget situation is in Minneapolis Public Schools and understanding what are some of the investments that have been made in order to make sure that we provide students with as much as we possibly can within our current budget constraints. And so, first thing to remember is that Minneapolis Public Schools had to go through this budgeting process twice, once during their regular timeline, and then a second time after the strike. The other thing is that student enrollment number projections are down about 1,000 students. And so in that process, they not only had to make up for some increased costs for staff, but they also needed to figure out, hey, we are actually going to be down 1,000 more students than we thought. And so we need to try to make up for that within our budget. And so some of the things that they've had to do in order to really balance this budget, and I think is going a little underestimated, and that's why I really wanted to highlight this slide, was the amount of money that is being invested from our ESSER $3 or our the federal money that came to Minneapolis Public Schools as a result of COVID. the district is putting in $129 million between 3 years of trying to invest in program continuity. Now, this is not building on new programming. This is not strengthening programming. This is just maintaining programming, including staff. And so they're investing a ton of money into this to try to push off the gaps, push off any decisions around changes to staffing, and that's where we're at right now. Additionally, the district is utilizing any additional savings that they had from vacant positions to cover. That was just money from this school year that they needed to do, right? Like they needed to cover some of the gaps from this school year, make up some of the pay that they owe teachers for this school year, and then next school year they're going to need to use the available additional federal money to cover the budget gap. And then they also needed to make the $27 million in cuts, which lots of people have heard about. But I think what's not been focused enough on is like what the district's actually doing in order to minimize that. Like they're not just saying, oh, $27 million, we're taking that away. Like there have been other things that they've moved money around to try to reduce the impact of those cuts. And so I think that's important, especially in the context of the conversation that the board had last night after Director Jourdain's amendment proposal around removing $10 million from the unassigned fund balance and putting that into the general operating budget. And again, just as a refresher, the unassigned fund balance is like your rainy day savings account, right? When you absolutely need money because checks aren't coming in the way that you need them to, you have a fire at your house, your building, whatever. Like that rainy day fund has to stay at a minimum of 8.4, or yeah, I believe 8%. And the district is at like 8.4%. And so they need to maintain those resources in the fund balance because as Ibrahima Diop, the senior financial officer, mentioned and discussed for the nth time last night,
At length.
fund at length, the fund balance is not to just be there, is not a place where we should just be draining money. The fund balance has a very necessary role where the district uses that to maintain cash flow, right? Like they need to pay teachers regularly, but the district does not get revenue regularly, right? And so they pull from the fund balance in order to pay staff throughout the course of the year.
As a matter of fact, last night Diop said they're currently at 5% because they've just pulled from that money in order to
right,
make payroll for the last month.
and they do that constantly all year round.
Constantly. Yeah.
On top of that, the fund balance is there if the school were ever to catch on fire. We need money quick in order to figure out, how are we going to build back a school or rent another building or whatever while that school is under construction, right? And then again, the fund balance is important because when we go to sell our bonds as a state, or sorry, as a school district, when we go to sell our bonds to try to make new construction projects, whatever,
Maintain buildings.
maintain
Add
buildings,
AC to buildings.
they need to have a strong credit rating, right? They need to have a strong bond rating in order to get good value on those bonds. And if we drain our fund balance, if we go below the threshold that the board has set as policy, that will reflect poorly on essentially the district's credit score.
Right.
And so utilize pulling the $10 million that Director Jourdain suggested ultimately failed. And I think it's important that the public understands why that fails, especially when I say the public, I mean us as taxpayers, right? Like we want not only the parents of this city, but taxpayers, like we all want to see Minneapolis public schools succeed. And in order for them to do that, they need to be financially strong and healthy. They can't have situations where they can't pay staff, if something turns in the economy, if a building burns down. Like we want to have responsible stewardship of the resources that we are paying constantly through our property taxes to the state that gives this school district money. So I do think that's important to remember and recognize. And so that's why the board's most important function, one of the most important functions, is around financial oversight and management. And thankfully, we have one of the most talented financial officers in the country to help manage this budget and to really protect the board from hurting itself when it comes to that responsibility. So that was my slide of the night, and my other little spiel about financial officer GAP.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, so I was going to say, let's move on to our do better moments from last night. So, Heather, you want to start us off?
Oh man. Okay. So my do better moment goes to I think every adult in the room last night. So student representative Rance shared that it was her last board meeting because she is moving away. She also took that opportunity to share a letter in which she'd clearly given a lot of thought and time and energy into naming an experience that happened to her as a student of color. It happened at Southwest High School. She named the principal and she named the teacher's name that caused the harm. She also shared a great amount of detail about how she and her family felt minimized and dismissed during the attempt to reconcile that situation and how ultimately there was no resolution. Now, as a parent of a student of color and a black woman in our district, I also have had a child stand in that boardroom and share a very similar experience and also share that she felt minimized and dismissed by the principal and the staff at the school when she shared it. And much like what I saw happen last night, um, the student representative was applauded and she was lauded for her bravery and for her courage. And she was brave. As a person who's blown whistles, I will say it is really scary to do that and to name names. And I think that when adults sit in a room and applaud a child, even though she's very, very intelligent and bright and clearly has an incredible future ahead of her, she's still a child, and she was a child when this happened to her, and the power dynamics were evident. When we applaud children for taking care of adult work without also committing to them that we are going to do our part, I think it is abusive. I don't have a better way to say that. But I was really disappointed that no one committed to further investigation, that no one in that board meeting went. We applauded her parents, but no one apologized to them for the racial harm done to them. And so I think it was indicative of the way I've seen racial harm and especially black girls, women treated in our district when they talk about the harm by teachers. And so my do better moment was to the adults in that room that applauded her without, they said, "You're going to go far." And no one said, "And we're going to do our part by making sure we removed the barriers that we upheld as a part of serving you."
Yeah. I thought that was an extremely powerful moment when Representative Ranch shared that story, especially from the dais. And I, yeah, was similarly just disappointed, especially from the board members who all had an opportunity to say something to her, who all went out of their way to tell Representative Rance, and a few of them took the opportunity to tell their parents how incredible of a job they did, how incredible she is, and conveniently took the opportunity to skirt around the huge issue that she said, "I want you to address." They applauded her bravery without having any courage themselves, and that's for every single board
That's
member.
right.
Um, and I think that's disappointing because I think this is a consistent theme that this board, past boards, future boards, probably, unless something changes, is unwilling to check any of that power, any unwilling to look at, hey, what systems are we holding in place that we allow this to happen? And parents are powerless. Student Representative Rance talked about how the principal was powerless in that situation to rectify that situation. There is no accountability for adults in this system, period. There is none. We hear parents talk about it constantly at school board meetings. There was another adult that went during public comment and mentioned it last night. And we are more committed to adults in Minneapolis than we are to the children of color in Minneapolis. And then we wonder why we have the same old disparities constantly. Nothing changes. Nothing ever changes. And so, yeah, Student Representative Rance, I really appreciate what she had to say. I do applaud her bravery, and I am committed to making sure that adults are held accountable, that adults are not just allowed to operate in that way and without any accountability. Um, so yeah, I'll go quick on um, my do better moment because it's one that I've said in past years, and this is just a rinse and repeat. But mine goes to specifically Director Inns. This was Director Inns is my school board member. I've said this before. I live in District 5, and he took the opportunity to vote no against the budget last night. He's done it before. He said last night how he's done it before. And it's not necessarily that he voted against the budget. I mean, it is what it is. I think what kills me is my school board member doesn't feel empowered after being a former chair, after being on the board for 8 years now, to take the opportunity to understand his influence on the budget. The Superintendent Graff specifically, has made it a pattern. I want to know what the board's priorities are. I want to know all these things from the board so that we have a smooth process. And sure, you know what, people can be against the budget by the end, but last night Director Inns was, seemed confused as to how, arts are being cut and all these things at different schools, and was unsure whose responsibility it is, who makes that decision. And this is after 8 years on the board, and you're my school board member. And I've never gone to my school board member to ask for anything that I care about, because I do not feel super confident that my school board member is aware of how they can or he should be using his power. So I think, there's a lot of positive things that Director Inns has done during his term and his years on the board, but he consistently does this, and it just acts surprised every year during, at the time to approve the budget. And it's really disappointing. And it also feels a little bit like a political stunt, because I doubt that if he was going to vote no against the budget, if it was a question whether the budget was actually going to get passed or not, because I do think he has more respect and appreciation for the finance department, who had to go through this budgeting cycle twice to then vote no against the budget that would ultimately fail, and they'd have to scramble to get one in before June.
Another one.
So I do think it was a political stunt. I don't really appreciate it as one of his constituents. I do, agree with him on some of his points around the budget. I just wish he would take the opportunities earlier on in the budgeting process to advocate for that, instead of, having a political performance at the end of the school year and at the end of the process. So
And as a parent who's served on site council, very new in my children's entrance into this district, the question he asked last night, you learn your very first year on site council as a parent. So
what I would just say is, I don't actually want this to be necessarily a personal attack or some vendetta against my school board member. What I'd actually say to the public is, you need to hold your own school board members accountable for being active participants in all the processes, and not just let them get away with a political performance to get
that's right.
to get votes, to get support, to garner, whatever
Approval
at the end of a process, when really they had the opportunity all the way through. And so I think that's why I want to highlight this point. I don't want to make it just about Director Inns. I do think this is a bigger problem that we have around, this political theater that happens instead of actually using your power to support students. Because again, that's what also happened to Representative Rance last night. There's this theater around, we love students, we appreciate Black and brown students, and then don't use your power to actually figure out how can we make this better and how do we hold the adults accountable that are in charge of their experience. So anyway, let's end on a positive note. Let's hear your most valuable moment from last night's meeting.
So my most valuable moment is the fact that we are going to have a K-5 math curriculum adoption. I'm so excited that we're going to have a consistent curriculum for math for K-5 students. It's clear after the pandemic and distance learning that we have massive gains to make up in math in our district. And so I'm really excited to hear the process that happened, to hear how the steering committee went through their work, to have an actual curriculum that we're bringing forward, and that we're going to continue that work through looking at a curriculum through 612. But I just, as a parent, I'm really excited to see that. I think it's something that is long overdue, and so I'm really looking forward to getting in and learning from students about math, and seeing our K5ers have something consistent, and seeing teachers have a consistent curriculum to teach from. As a former teacher, consistent curricula is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a huge deal, and really excited for MPS to be moving in that direction, and also to just hear the amount of like parent, student, teacher input buy-in um, in the process. I think
Yeah,
that was great too. So
that's right.
um, my most valuable moment was honestly that the budget passed, and I really want to assign a lot of credit to, again, senior officer Giop and the finance department for, again, going through this budget cycle twice, being smeared for the last 6 months around the integrity of the budget and the finances that he was making public. People question it, years for years now. We've been questioning this man, and like as a city, even board members questioning his ability to actually manage our finances.
That's right.
Um, and he continues to lead a department selflessly, and without wanting a lot of shine, putting other people in front, and to pass this budget after everything that we experienced with the changes to the finances with the strike, giving principals time and space to an extent, to figure out how they're going to manage the changes in their budget, making sure that there's a 1% increase overall in school allocations. I just think we as a city owe a lot, to senior officer Giop and the finance department once again. So really want to hold him high, and I think everyone should get an opportunity to, or take the opportunity to thank him, send him an email, because this
Mhm.
was a Herculean effort, despite all of the challenges that folks were putting in front of them. And they passed a budget, and I understand that not everyone's going to be happy with the budget. I know, we're not happy with the budget. It's a really bad financial constraint that Minneapolis Public Schools is in, and he has worked tirelessly within the constraints that the board has been giving him, and with what they will and will not address, and continues to pull together a budget, and a balanced budget, and make sure that we're in a financially healthy place. So that's my most valuable moment, is to Senior Officer Giop and the finance department.
And we also owe his hair, because he said that he has more gray hair as a result of doing the budget. And what he said was the thing that keeps him up at night is making sure that there's a Minneapolis public schools that is fiscally around for the students of 5 years from now, and not just today. And as a parent, I appreciate that.
As a parent has their child in Minneapolis Public Schools probably for the next 4 years, I bet you really appreciate that.
That's right. I mean, I'm not happy about the budget cuts, but I am thankful that he's thinking about more than just the discomfort of this moment.
Yeah. So with that, you've gotten plenty of information in a recap, plenty of our spicy thoughts about the last night board meeting. And I hope you have a great rest of your day, and thanks for listening.
Bye.